All right, team, welcome to another episode of the Exceptional Leadership Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Matt Hamilton, delighted to have your company with me once again for an in-depth look today at the power of story. Now, you might be wondering what I mean by that, and I'd like you to think of it as follows. So human beings have a real affinity for stories and storytelling. In fact, it's helped us build nations. I want you to think of the American dream and the Australian dream as great examples of that. And it's important for us because we build our culture and our identity around that story. It gives us a bit of a sense of who we are or who we strive to be. It's a real guiding light in some cases. But it doesn't just stop at the nation building level. It also can be found in organizational culture very commonly. A good practical example might be Toyota, for example. When you think of Toyota, you might think reliability because that has become a part of their story and something that guides what they do. It's something that we've all bought into. Most of us would probably agree that Toyotas in general are pretty reliable. Now, are they any more reliable than any other car? I don't have any evidence to suggest that that is the case. But that is nonetheless a part of the story that I've bought into as a consumer, and I wouldn't be surprised if you have too. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of this, I do just want to reach back all the way to the 1970s and have a look at a story that built Southwest Airlines culture. Now, those of you in the North American part of the world will be very familiar with Southwest as they operate pretty extensively over there. So let's have a look at how Southwest Airlines use story to build culture. Southwest Airlines started in the early 1970s as a scrappy regional airline in Texas. Now at the time they had just 4 planes and they were trying to compete against much larger carriers. The company's survival was constantly in question, and one day the leadership faced a tough decision. Financial pressures meant selling one of the planes. Doing so could disrupt operations and upset schedules, but they had no choice if they wanted the airline to survive. So instead of cutting corners or scaling back service, the founders decided on a bold alternative. They would keep all scheduled flights operating and turn the planes around in just 10 minutes, a process that traditionally took 30 to 40 minutes. This decision became more than an operational tactic. It became a story that defined the airline. We are the airline that never quits. We find a way and we do more with less. We work together as a team to get the job done. Employees embrace this story. Baggage handlers, pilots, gate agents and flight attendants all work together in ways that they hadn't before, innovating and collaborating to make the impossible schedule work. That story shapes the company's identity. We are scrappy, fast-moving, and team first. And from that identity, a culture was formed, and it consisted of 3 things: resourcefulness, solving problems creatively; teamwork, no one succeeds alone; and thirdly, customer focus, delivering service even when under intense pressure. And those cultural values guided behaviour for decades, influencing hiring, decision-making, and employee engagement. Even today, decades later, Southwest employees are trained and celebrated using stories from those early challenging days, reinforcing the same identity and values. The story isn't just history, it's a living part of how the company operates. And that, I think, sets the scene very nicely for a little bit more of an in-depth look, a narrowing of the scope for us as leaders. Now, you know what I like to do with these topics. I like to take these big, broad, contextual examples, and I like to narrow the focus right down, and I like to see how we can apply it in the boardroom. And there's a couple of thoughts that I had in respect to this. So just some initial thoughts. In organizations, we have policies. And our policies explain the rules to everybody. But our stories explain who we are as an organization. And the power of a story is that it gives us a scaffold to build our organisational identity around. And that's really powerful, because if that identity is crafted well, it has the power to motivate employees to buy in to the story and align their actions with it. And the reason that's powerful is because when you get people doing that as a collective, that in turn, given enough time and that collective effort, enables a great culture to be built, which is no mean feat. It's difficult to build good culture, but I would suggest to you that it starts with a story, a guiding light that we can work towards. Now, any doubt as to the power of a good story? I referenced this at the top of the episode. Any doubt as to the power of crafting a good story that tells people who an organisation is? I think it can be eradicated quite simply by thinking about human history and the trajectory that we've taken as a species. There's a book that I would recommend you read. It is on the bookshelf behind me here. And it's called Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind. And there's a quote from that book that I wanted to share with you all today that I think illustrates this point really nicely. And it's as follows. Large numbers of strangers can cooperate successfully by believing in common myths. Any large-scale human cooperation, whether a modern state, a medieval church, an ancient city, or archaic tribe, is rooted in common myths that exist only in people's collective imagination. So what that serves to illustrate is that there's a few things we can pull out of that statement. Large numbers of strangers cooperating together, isn't that exactly what an organisational is? An organisational structure is. Modern day organisations and businesses, large groups of strangers that are ideally cooperating together. And the belief in common myths, demonstrably important at every level in human history. The examples given here, medieval churches, modern states such as the ones that we exist in today, ancient cities, tribes, whatever organisational structure you care to mention, we can demonstrate through human history that it's the power of story that brings people together and helps get us moving in the same direction together. Think about money. Money is just paper. It doesn't mean anything objectively, but because we all choose to believe that it is of value, we agree on the system, we agree on the story, we function better as a society. I mentioned the American dream, something to aspire to. The Australian dream is very similar. It's a story. It's not anything that physically exists. It's an idea. It's something to aspire to, a guiding light, as I said at the top of the episode. And then on the corporate level, and there are many other examples of this, I just picked out Toyota because this one resonated with me strongly. At that corporate level, a part of their story, perhaps more so than any other car brand, is reliability. If there's one word that you would associate with Toyota, I'm willing to bet that most people would say reliability or something to that effect. It has been baked in over decades to be a part of their story. And then with that, things like efficiency. Very powerful stuff from an organisational perspective. Now, how can we as leaders leverage this? Because, one of the things we do like to think about is how we incorporate this at an everyday level for our teams. You might think, well, I'm not leading a massive organisation, I'm leading a team of 3 people, or however big your team is. And I talk regularly about the job of a leader at middle management and down really being comprised significantly of this. And that is taking the corporate messaging from the executive level and translating that into something that means something to those you lead. Taking the corporate jargon and distilling it into something that the people you lead can run with in a way that's meaningful to them, that motivates them, that gives them purpose, that gives them direction. And the power of story is no different. As leaders, we set the tone, don't we? We really proactively drive culture and all the things that comprise of a good culture. And we can use story to help us. We can use story as a foundation to drive those initiatives from. The story can be the bedrock for us to fall back on. Let's explore that a little bit more. From a culture building perspective, it is very useful, I would suggest, to have an organization-wide story to use as a template upon which you scaffold all the behaviours that you want to see and model as a leader. Maybe, for example, if we use the maintenance space as an example, let's say you're a facilities maintenance manager. Perhaps your organisational story is customer first. Let's keep it really high level. Let's just say our story is that we always put the customer first. What does that look like to you and the team members that are under you? Well, maybe it's not walking past a job and ignoring it. For example, maybe a light has blown out in the roof. And you take the time, because you're customer first, and you believe in that story, and you model that story, you take the time to see if anyone's logged a job for it. And if they haven't logged a job for it, you proactively get a job logged and you fix that light without anybody asking. That is a simple, everyday example of how your behaviour that's hopefully been instilled in the team can align with a simple story or a simple narrative that happens at the very top. Now, I'm sure that'll apply differently to you depending on what industry you work in, but you get my gist here. Our job as leaders is to translate for our teams. What does that story mean? What is that high-level headline, that aspirational ideology of the company? What does that mean to us at an everyday level on the floor? And I'd love you to have a think about that. So what story is your organization telling? And how are you as a leader working to support and reinforce that story and that identity and that culture that feeds in to that story? Maybe you're an entrepreneur and maybe you haven't got around to building a story for your organization yet. And I would encourage you to think really carefully about that, because throughout human history, as I've illustrated just with a couple of examples here today in this episode, story can be incredibly powerful. And I would challenge you to think about if story works at a nation building level, and in all those other examples, as per that quote from the book Sapiens that I quoted, why wouldn't it be of significant value to you and your organization in helping people feel like they belong to something and feeling like they have something to take pride in? It's an interesting concept, isn't it? And something that I think for you as a business owner or an entrepreneur is well worth investigating. Guys, we're going to leave it there. I appreciate you joining me. Have a look at www.exceptionalleadershippodcast.com. Got a bunch of blog posts up there right now, which I think you'll find very useful if you're looking to just delve a little bit deeper into some leadership insights. So please have a look at that. Sign up for the Brief, just a fortnightly newsletter that will go out to your email with some of my thoughts for the week with respect to leadership. And of course, subscribe. Whatever podcast app you're listening to the show on, remember that it really helps me and helps the show. Leave a 5-star review and please hit the subscribe button. But until next time, I'll see you later.